Salvete vos. Good day, everyone. I am John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast and recording is to get our weekly installment of The Project under our belts. And as I get all the toggles and buttons clicked, and I'll be on the screen momentarily, The Project is our integrated humanities curricula, which studies all of human life over a 3-year span. And this has marvelous qualities to make the human saga on this earth comprehensible, not going through it once or twice or thrice, but as an ongoing study. The texts that we select allow and especially recommend themselves to group discussions like in a classroom. So we use the project in our private classes, which you're invite you to consider enrolling in, and we have various tiers of commitment to that: full-time, weekly, monthly, and then there are the lot of you online on social media who are following us just as truly, but from a distance in a less committed fashion. And that's what these particular broadcasts are. Should you enroll in some level or other of the private courses, obviously there's much more engagement, much more discussion, and indeed more reading as well. But you'll see that the structure we have is quite variable to various states in life and commitment levels. Ultimately, most people are going to interact with the Apocatastasis project in the aggregate in a more distant way. After all, our dear students, please God, will continue to cycle through the readings for the remainder of their lives. And that won't be in the intense daily version, but that familiarity will be there. For this year, as we're really developing the curricula, we're mostly focused on H.G. Wells's Outline of History. This forms the skeleton, we'll say, of the project. However, the heart of the project is our monthly poetry cycle. There's a stable collection of about 250 poems, which you read each month, every month. That's the heart. The skeleton is H.G. Wells's Outline of History, and there are other texts as well. There's a second tier of readings each week and a third tier. It does not really involve more than 25 minutes of commitment a day, which is a lot for some people, but if it's less, that's fine too. Anyway, you can find out all about the project on our website. That, however, is not our advertisement. Let me get the screen share squared away. That was just bringing us up to speed with what are we doing in this recording. What's happening? But by way of advertisement, I bring your attention and mine to our beautiful website. Here's the main page and some of the things you can enjoy this month of September. The autumn semester has started, and we have open language readings in Greek and Latin on Tuesdays, so you can find out about that. A bit about our pedagogical philosophy here. I suppose that's a bit redundant. Pedagogy is educational philosophy. Let's say our educational philosophy. Here's Vandana's poem. She teaches courses on abacus mathematics using that old tool, the abacus, and handwriting. And I won't read everything here, but also you can find out, if you're interested in enrolling in Apocatastasis or teaching with us, some of the guidelines, just to make sure we're all on the same page there so that we don't waste each other's time. So that's also available on PDF, as are a host of other presentations and documents all over our site. I lately uploaded the film When the Wind Blows from the BBC in 1986 about nuclear war told through a cartoon. So, all right. So now we're moving into our poetry, and I thought to bring up a recent Substack post that I made has nothing to do with our subject, which is the caveman days, as well as the flooding of the Mediterranean Valley, one of the more memorable aspects of H.G. Wells' outline of history. But I mentioned the project has poetry at the heart of it, and here's a light piece by James Joyce, Humpty Dumpty. And here's our man himself. Okay, this is indeed by James Joyce. This is a recording that Ronnie Drew did of this at the bottom of the page. Have you heard of one Humpty Dumpty, how he fell with a roll and a rumble, and he crawled up like Lord Oliver Cromwell at the butt of the magazine wall, hump helmet and all. He was one time our king of the castle, now he's kicked about like a rotten old parsnip. On the Green Street he'll be sent by order of his worship to the penal jail of Mountjoy, jail him with joy. He was the father of all schemes for to bother us, slow coaches and immaculate conceptives for the populace. There's milk for the 6-7 dry Sundays a week, open air love and religious reform, so hideous in form. Why, says you, couldn't he manage it? I'll go bail me fine dairyman, darling, like the bumping bulls of the Cassidys, all your butters in his horns. Hurrah there, hurry, frosty, hosty, change that shirt and ye, rhyme the Ran, the king of all Rans, balbaccio. We had a cha-cha chops, chain, chewing gum and chicken pox and china chambers, all provided for this soft-soaping salesman. Small wonder he cheat, ere one, the local lad's nickname, when Chimpenden first took the floor with his bucket shop store out in Bag and Wag lower. So snug he was in his hotel, sumptuous. But soon will bonfire all his trash, tricks, and trumpetry, and 'tis short till Sheriff Clancy will be winding up his unlimited company with bailiffs born at the door, bim bam at the door, and then he'll bum no more. Sleep had luck in the waves, washed our island, the hooker and the hammerfish Viking, the gull curse in the day when the Glenna Bay saw his black and tan men of war in the harbor bar. Where from roars pool beg, cockenhaws pensy balls, daughter me, scampittle whippin fenny pen, fingo mac Oscar, once seen bardasi boniface, thoxmin gamma hole, nor the jickers moniker, ogazai on gamma horn, nor the gickers cod, a Norwegian camel's old cod, is the god. So that is James Joyce's Humpty Dumpty. And I was talking to someone before class. I can't quite place where this appears, if it's in Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake or whatever the case may be. But a fun piece of poetry nonetheless. Humpty Dumpty. And this is from this week's Substack. Okay, we're going to do a check tech, and then we're going to get right into the business at hand, which is cavemen. And so here we have week 2, and these weekly broadcasts that we're doing here are kind of a condensation of them. If you enroll in the full course, of course, we're going to meet for each day's selection. So each volume, there are 4 volumes in the project, and they are broken up into groups of 13 weeks, one for each season. At least mathematically, a season is 13 weeks. At least if you break up 52 weeks by 4, you get 13. So the fall volume indeed has 13 weeks. And we are on week 2. And each week, of course, is broken up into 7 days, starting with Sunday and going therefrom. And unbeknownst to you, next year, you will know it, I've been backfilling each day with an additional reading. So there will be 2 cycles of reading, as I say, thematically unified. And then next year, unbeknownst to you, next year, you'll have 2 cycles of reading, whilst I will be backfilling it with a 3rd and final selection for each day of the year, typically from a philosophical or literary selection that's appropriate to the first 2 readings. So If this sounds familiar, all you Christian liturgy nerds, if this sounds at all familiar, it's because the breviary, the divine office, whatever, was a great inspiration to this very project. To understand the breviary, you don't just read it once or even read it for 1 year. It has to be an ongoing, almost lifelong commitment. It's dry, it's dull, it's boring, and it bears tremendous fruit, but only after years of commitment. And it's fruit that you cannot get anywhere else. You much less can get it in a cursory reading of encyclopedias or attending a few courses here and there. There's a discipline and a long-term aspect to the project, which is truly unique to it. All right. Now I have my coffee here ready to go, which is how we know we're ready to go. But I do want to get my little fan, which will cool down the coffee. A little cute fan that I put to work here. Just let me organize this proper. And there we go. So week 2 Sunday, and then I'm halfway through our class. I'll be switching over to another article. We're mainly looking at the great dramatic scene this week of the flooding of the Mediterranean. This is a rather scientific schema. This is a more dramatic one as I get my fan. And it is the flooding of the Mediterranean, which people often point out as being one of the strong suits of the project. I hope you cannot hear that too obnoxiously. The background music and with my gibbering going on, but that sound here is my little coffee cooling fan. So you'll have to bear with me. I'll keep it as far away from the mic as I can. And I think I will survive. All right, so this is a type of digital representation of the flooding of the Mediterranean Valley. So let's get right into it. Again, we're picking up with caveman days. I'm going to read, I'm going to gibber, I'm going to read, I'm going to gibber. You can add questions. You can just write us at our AOL address. Here we go. There's not enough evidence for a judgment. Possibly they mingled to a certain extent. We talked about this last week. The Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon and Homo sapien men and their interaction and lack of interaction, as the case may be. And this is not in contradiction necessarily with stories like the Nephilim and things of that nature. There being different so-called races. There is to prevent our believing that they survived without much intermixture for a long time in North Asia, and that pockets of them remained here and there. Let's see who we're talking about. I do believe it's Cro-Magnon man. Yeah, Cro-Magnon. Here we go. Right there in the middle, Cro-Magnon. All right. And okay, boy, you found me out. Look up. I've been busted. Let's see here. Boobs. Okay. Well, if you see that in our time together, that is my marker. So when I open this file, which is about 200 pages long, on this old Chromebook, which does not allow me to go down to week 2, what I have to do is put a marker, which is the word boobs, the best John Coleman fashion. And then what I have to do is go to the find and replace button. So there happens to be nowhere else in this selection of text this word. So it's a unique word, and you're lucky because I could have chosen a harsher word of a different body part. But yeah, so if you come across that, now you know the inside baseball. I can't really scroll here. I can scroll with the arrows, but anyway. About 12,000 or fewer years ago it was that the speed of the forests and great change of the fauna and the long prevalence of hunting life in Europe drew to its end. Of course, we're talking especially today about agriculture and settling down. Reindeer vanished. Changing conditions frequently bring with them new diseases. There may have been prehistoric pestilences. For many centuries, there may have been no men in Britain or Central Europe. For a time, there were in Southern Europe drifting communities of some little-known people who were called Azalians. They may have been transition generations, they may have been a different race, we do not know. Some authorities incline to the view that the Azalians were the first wave of a race, which, as we shall see later, has played a great part in populating Europe, the dark white, or shall we say Mediterranean or Iberian race. The swarthy Europeans. These Azalian peoples have left behind them a multitude of pebbles, roughly daubed with markings of an unknown purport. The use or significance of these Azalian pebbles is still a profound mystery. This was some sort of token, was it? Some sort of token writing? Were they counters in some game? Did the Azalians play with these pebbles or tell a story with them, as imaginative children will do with bits of wood and stone nowadays? At present, we are unable to cope with any of these questions. We will not deal here with other various peoples who left their scanty traces in the world during the close of the new Paleolithic period. So again, I mean, we're dealing with, you know, scant nuggets. I mean, we have leftovers in caves. We looked last week at cave art. There are some bones preserved, but bones corrupt eventually as well. You have some obvious manipulation of things like stones. But everything else you have to kind of fill in. That's in fact one of the critiques oftentimes in museums and so forth. You're trying to make this time period, this prehistory, because there's no history without writing, traditionally speaking. This prehistory, you're trying to make it applicable to people in the museum or on the History Channel. And so what we'll often obtain is spinning yarns about skeletons. So you'll come up with a whole backstory. The producer or the museum director will come up with a whole backstory. And I've seen that actually done not just with prehistoric peoples or individuals in later history who we really can't quite pin down, where you'll get a bit creative with the historical process. I've actually seen that with animal documentaries as well. My goodness, must be 15 years now. 15 years ago, there was a documentary called The March of the Penguins. And you'll actually see this has been copied a lot since then, where the narrator or the writer will come up with this whole like dramatic story about the penguins, and Mrs. Penguin's not talking to Mr. Penguin, and they give them names, and they come up with all this a reality show drama on the animal. I've seen this with lion shows as well. And it makes for good viewing, I'll tell you that much. I don't know, getting back to history and how this is misused perhaps in history, I don't know how true to life it is. It veers very much into the artistic, which is great, and the entertaining, which is great. But the scientific, the impartial, it is blurring the line, this sort of thing. And even Wells will play around with that. We're going to get to the old man. If not this class, probably not this class, but next week, the old man and the origins of religion, where Wells, plays a little bit with this dramatic aspect. He's, of course, largely a fiction writer himself, so give him a break. And we don't want to be too doctrinaire about separating. I got to be careful here, but in terms of historical writing, let me put it this way: in terms of historical writing, we historians could use a bit of the artistic touch. And just because we have an eye to style and to storytelling does not invalidate or make less objective what we're saying. And a lot of history writing is very, very dry. And in a strange way, it's almost meant to be dry, so that only the real historians will read it. But that's, I think, a rather nasty spirit behind that. All of us could use we can all use to be a bit more stylish, and there's nothing wrong with that. So skipping ahead here, of course, you will have read the whole week, no doubt. Hitherto, men in Europe had never gone farther north than the Baltic Sea or the English Midlands, but now Ireland, Scandinavian peninsula, and perhaps Greater Russia were being possible regions for human occupation. There are no Paleolithic remains in Sweden or Norway, neither Ireland or Scotland. Man, when he entered these countries, was apparently already at the Neolithic stage of social development. Or is there any convincing evidence of man in America before the end of the Pleistocene? The same relaxation of climate, that's what's fueling all of these migrations, as it will happen again and again in the future. The same relaxation of climate that permitted the retreat of the reindeer hunters into Russia and Siberia as the Neolithic tribes advanced may have allowed them to wander across the land that is now cut by the Bering Strait and so reach the American continent. And of course, we would be blind not to notice the similarities between North and South American Indians and Asiatics, and particularly their facial features, their eyes, notably their noses as well, very Asiatic. Well, one of the thoughts to that is the crossing of the now cut Bering Strait. So, the Bering Strait is that land bridge, or that former land bridge between Russia, extreme northeastern Russia, and the American state of Alaska. What was going through their minds? I don't care how much the climate is relaxing. I don't know what would bring people up there, except that you're nomads, and that's where the reindeers are going, I suppose. When they reached South America, they found the giant sloth, the glyphodon, and many other extinct creatures were still flourishing. The glyphodon was a monstrous South American armadillo, and a human skeleton has been found by Roth, buried beneath its huge tortoise-like shell. Remarkable. All the human remains in America, even the earliest, is to be noted, are of an Amerindian character. In America, there does not seem to have been any preceding races of submen. Man was a fully man when he entered America. The old world was a nursery of the sub-races of mankind. Okay, and occasionally in the outline of history, we'll have these little synopses, the beginning of proper chapters. So here we now settle down. What did I name this class here? Settling down. Agriculture's invention. How do you like that? I set all this up the night before. There's nothing more of a drag than having to set up and teach back to back, because the setup takes probably 50% as long as the class and all the little particulars, believe it or not, to get all the tabs arranged and so forth. So if you're ever doing this sort of work, what you want to do is do all the legwork the night before. All right. So the Neolithic phase of human affairs began in Europe about 10 to 12,000 years ago, but probably men had reached the Neolithic stage elsewhere some thousands of years earlier. Neolithic men came slowly into Europe from the south or southeast as the reindeer and the open steppes give way to forest and modern European conditions. The Neolithic stage of culture is characterized, and you want to take notes about this, the presence of polished stone implements, in particular the axe. I'm just skipping over the filling details, which you will have read. 2, the beginning of a sort of agriculture and the use of plants and seeds. 3, pottery and proper cooking. And interestingly, the horse is no longer eaten. 4, domesticated animals. Here we see the introduction of the domesticated dog, planting and weaving. 5. These Neolithic people probably migrated into Europe in the same way that the reindeer men had migrated before them. That is to say, generation by generation and century by century. As the climate changed, they spread after their accustomed food. They were not nomads. Nomadism, like civilization, had still to be developed. So these are not nomads. At present, we are quite unable to estimate how far the Neolithic peoples were now newcomers, how far they were newcomers, and how far their art were developed or acquired be the descendants of some of the hunters and fishers of the later Paleolithic age. Whatever our conclusions in the matter, this much we may say with certainty: there's no great break, no further sweeping away of one kind of man and replacement by another, between the appearance of the Neolithic way of living and our own time. Okay. Now, this is a major step. After a long time, gold, the first known of the metals, appears among the bone ornaments. What the hell is it with gold? It appears with jet and amber. Irish Neolithic remains are particularly rich in gold. Then, perhaps 6,000 or 7,000 years ago in Europe, Neolithic people began to use copper in certain centers, making out of it implements of much the same pattern as their stone ones. And he goes on here, they cast the copper in molds made to the shape of the stone implements. Gold. I had a thought, and I don't blush to get a little bit woo on this series, just like I mentioned, a certain openness to the idea of Nephilim when it comes to this subject of prehistoric races, what natural science calls prehistoric races. And I just had a thought this morning, and, we'll see what comes up. That is gold in the blood. I was thinking, what the hell is it with gold? I mean, okay, it can conduct. That's what we want, actually, gold in the blood. It can conduct well, but. And then I was thinking, if all the money is based off, digital money is supposed to be based off of paper money, which is theoretically based off of the GDP, which at one point was based off of metals, no more. And it's all symbolic of something before it. But then it got to thinking, is there gold in the blood? And so is blood, is it, and that plugs into certain, more esoteric aspects about this society that we live in. And again, the obvious obsession that people have with gold and civilizations have with gold is there's some connection to the blood. Your blood is gold. See this from Metacover Genetics. For what it's worth, learn about the components of blood and symptoms and treatments of blood disorders. An adult human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood, which contain different metals such as iron, chromium, and zinc, as well as about 0.2 milligrams of gold! Human blood is essential to life as it transports oxygen and nutrients, collects waste products, delivers immune cells throughout the body, and forms clots during injury to prevent blood loss. Since blood has a vital life-giving role in maintaining healthy bodily function, disorders that affect the blood can have serious consequences and affect our overall health. Okay. I want more about blood and gold. Okay, so there is gold in blood, or vice versa. The average person's body weighing 70 kilograms, once again, would contain a total mass of 0.2 milligrams of gold. This is from goldtraders.uk. So the first one was some genetics lab. And then here we have Gold Traders. Probably not the best people to be going to for medical insights, but anything with gold gets their attention. So according to the technical treatise, The Elements, 3rd edition, written by John Elmsley and published be the Clarendon Press, Oxford in 98, the average human person's body, as I say, weighs 70 kilograms, has 0.2 milligrams of gold. The volume of this gold purified would be 10 nanoliters. If this refined gold were formed into a solid cube of purified gold, the measurement on each side of the cube would be 0.22 millimeters. This trace amount is so tiny that it is imperceptible, yet it's there, found mostly in our blood. Gold, along with other trace elements, plays a small but essential role in our bodies, contributing, so it's a small but essential. This is a vital essay. The root word of essential is essay, to be. It's a fundamental. It's the most fundamental word, essential. And gold contributes to processes like cellular communication and even joint health. The gold in our bodies is not enough to form a visible substance, let alone a piece of jewelry. All you adrenochrome harvesters out there, I guess you're after something else besides gold. Yet its presence is a testament to the fascinating complexity of our biology. So that's quite interesting. If all humans' gold were collected, according to the United Nations, I'm sure this is probably what they think about when the doors are closed. According to the United Nations, there were about 8 billion people on Earth in 22. If we collected 0.2 milligrams of gold within each person, we'd gather around 1,600 kilograms. To put this into another perspective, this amount would equate to about, wow, okay, all right, look at this. So if you got all the gold from all the alleged people on the earth, you would have 128 standard gold bars, each weighing 12.5 kilograms. Although this might sound significant, this collective amount remains modest in the context of the global gold reserves. Even with the entire human population's contribution, it would yield only a small vault of gold. We'll end it here and transition, but what's the value of all the gold in every human based on the current? Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is what I wanted to, you kind of was knocking around this morning. Based on the connection between all of this monetary system and gold, and why gold is persistently brought up. There has to be, maybe it's not a connection to the blood, but I was just thinking, what's behind the metals? And we say the digital money is based on paper money, which is no longer based on metals. It's based on theoretically tangible, gross domestic product. Okay, this tangible, but what's based behind that? Like, for instance, in Latin, the word for coin and money originally was pecus. There are other words as well, but the earliest word is pecus, which comes, or pecunia, excuse me, pecunia, wealth, comes from pecus, which means cow. Again, there are different words for money and different words for cow in Latin, but those are the oldest ones. There's a connection, meaning at some point cows were used for money. You can deduce that. At some point in ancient Rome, probably during, at least at latest the Etruscan period, maybe even before, cows were money, and then just the word cow became the word for money. Likewise, what's the obsession of gold? Is the gold, is there some deeper meaning? Anyway, based on the current live price of gold, the cumulative value of all the gold in the human population of the planet equates to 138 million pounds. I don't know why they put the decimal for the pence and the pennies. 138, 400,000, a million pounds. Okay. I can go on reading this for quite a while, but we have to boogie woogie. We must leave this behind, and we indeed must leave Wells behind for the moment. Great. Maybe we'll read a little bit of Wells, just how he describes this. But the great event in this section this week is the flooding in the Mediterranean Valley. And let's see what our man has to say on this point. We're just going to skip ahead quite a bit. You can see Wells dusts off some of his artistic faculties for this. You can find, by the way, the previous weeks on our project site, as well as getting access to this document. I mentioned the invention of bows and other implements, the domestication of specific species, the trial and error behind farming. Okay. The reasons for believing this are very good. Believing what? Almost certainly human beings and possibly even Neolithic men wandered over that now lost Mediterranean valley. So, what we call the Mediterranean Ocean was once a valley that was not filled in with water, it was just a valley. The reasons for believing this are very good and plain. To this day, the Mediterranean is a sea of evaporation. The rivers that flow into it do not make up for that evaporation from its surface. There's a constant current of water pouring into the Mediterranean from the Atlantic, and another current streaming in from the Bosphorus and Black Sea. But the Black Sea gets more water than it needs from the big rivers that flow into it, and it is an overflowing sea, whilst the Mediterranean is a thirsty sea, from which it must be plain that when the Mediterranean was cut off from both the Atlantic and the Black Sea, it must have been a shrinking sea with its waters sinking into a much lower level than those of the ocean outside. This is the case of the Caspian Sea today. Still more so is it the case with the Dead Sea. But if this reasoning is sound, then where today roll the blue waters of the Mediterranean, there must once have been a great area of land, and land with very agreeable climate. This was probably the case during the last glacial age, and we do not know how near it was to our time when the change occurred that brought back the ocean waters into the Mediterranean basin. Certainly there must have been Grimbaldi people, perhaps even Azalian and Neolithic people, going about the valleys and forests of these regions, what now is the bottom of the Mediterranean, mind you. The Neolithic dark whites, Iberians, etc., the people of the Mediterranean race may have gone far towards the beginning of settlement and civilization in that great lost Mediterranean valley. Mr. W.B. Wright gives some very stimulating suggestions here. He suggests that in the Mediterranean basin there were two lakes. One, a freshwater lake in the Eastern Depression, which drained into the other in the Western Depression. It is interesting to think what must have happened when the ocean level rose once more as a result of the dissipation of the ice sheets and the waters beginning to pour over into the Mediterranean areas. So we need to think in a more schematic way. So here's an example, as we read in the middle, of the Western Mediterranean. My cursor is here, the Western Mediterranean. Here's the Eastern Mediterranean. Pretend you're looking at, you're sitting in Africa at the waterline. This is what you're seeing. You have here on the far left of my screen, this is the Atlantic. And then you have this first trench, which is shallower. And then you have this second trench. So this is basically the Straits of Gibraltar. In fact, they tell us here, Straits of Gibraltar. This is your whole area with Corsica and Sardinia. That area, right? Tripoli, Spain, Italy on the west, southern France, right? This is that area. And then you have this, what they call the Sicily Sill. This is that area between Sicily and Tunis, and the kind of the choke point, which will become very important in later ancient history with Carthage. And then you have the second half of the Mediterranean from Tunisia and Sicily all the way to the Levant. And you can see it's much deeper. So this is what Wells is describing in a physical schematic. All right, now I do want to move to another article here on this point, and this comes from the it comes from the National Geographic. Last week we had Smithsonian, this week the National Geographic. I would really recommend this website, by the way. It's called Textize. It's a very simple website, and actually I like it more even than Print Friendly, which I had been using up until I found this. Print Friendly is useful for indeed, formatting PDFs. But if you just want to read it without all the razzle dazzle and advertisements, whatever article, just drop it into Textize, and you'll get an even tighter and easier to use presentation than even print friendly. So this is from Textiles, but it's actually from National Geographic. How the biggest flood in the history of the Earth created the Mediterranean. Scientists reveal new details about the 5.3 million year old flood, which triggered earthquakes, generated tropical storm force winds, and created a waterfall 30 times taller than Niagara. Wow, that's a big waterfall. The Mediterranean was once a dried up expanse of salt and gypsum. Then the floodwaters come rushing in. 6 millions of years ago, the Mediterranean Sea wasn't nearly as picturesque as it is today. It barely was even a sea. Tectonic activity had raised a mountain range in the Strait of Gibraltar, cutting off the Mediterranean from the Atlantic. Without a constant inflow of water, the sea evaporated under the baking sun, and all that remained were a few scattered briny lakes, surrounded by mile after mile of salt and gypsum. Today, scientists call this the Messinian salinity crisis. In the dying days of the Miocene age, an epoch, most of the Mediterranean died. But if on a certain day, about 3.5 million years ago, you happen to go for a stroll along that mountain range, you might have discovered something odd, a trickle of water making its way down one of the mountains from the Atlantic Ocean beyond it. The mountains had been very slowly sinking until their summits were level with the ocean's surface. One day, the mountains sank just enough for some of the water to spill over their edges. Again, back to our illustration here, right? So this is what they're talking about. The Atlantic is rising because of this climate change. And then eventually, that's going to spill over, and they begin it dramatically with just a trickle. It's almost like an adventure movie, right? Just a trickle. And again, here's an artist digital rendition. I couldn't quite tell you from what angle. If I had to guess, I would say that this is from the Straits of Gibraltar, which are not covered with water down here. I had to guess. This is your Spain here. This is part of what become Corsica and Sicily. This is France, Britain, Ireland, Germany out here. Therefore, this would be eventually Italy, although much of it submerged. But this would be your Sicilian sill, at this point forming more or less a bridge between Europe and North Africa. You can see there's that little inflow between the eastern and western Mediterranean where my cursor is. Very interesting. Once the water spilled over, the water carved an unstoppable path downhill. The trickle turned into a stream, which widened into a river, and soon the ocean was pouring into the dried out, desiccated Mediterranean basin. The force of 1,000 Amazon rivers suddenly ending the 600,000-year-long dry spell. It's a hell of a dry spell. The water moved so quickly, 32 meters per second, or about 72 miles per hour, by the time it hit the coast of modern-day Sicily. But it dragged the air behind it, creating tropical storm force winds as it moved. If you managed to somehow see through all the muddy sediment stood up by the floodwaters, you might have found a few surprised fish in the depths, stunned or struck dead outright by the force of the rapids that carried them in from the Atlantic. As the water refilled the Mediterranean, it ushered in a new geological era, the Zanclean era. So is this the inspiration for things like the flood of Noah? You wonder some of these things, and the flood in Gilgamesh, and all these peoples that have a flood story. Interesting. Obviously, if the Atlantic is rising, it's not just rising outside the door of the Straits of Gibraltar, what we call them now, but across the board. So that would help explain why so many world civilizations speak of a flood. I don't think any human has ever seen anything like it, says Aaron Milcalf, a National Geographic explorer and marine geoscientist at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, who studies this event called the Zaklan megaflood. Milcalf and his colleagues have spent years putting together the puzzle pieces of what the flood looked like, and this story is largely built on their research, which melds geologic evidence with computer modeling. While evidence for the flood is still accumulating, this is the scientists' best picture of what it's like, the largest flood in the history of the Earth. The fossil record is difficult to read. Much of it is difficult to read in much detail, but scientists, again, this is the precarity of fossils, human and animal and plant. But scientists think that before the sea dried it up, it was filled with all kinds of creatures, from ancient sharks and pinnipeds to fish and a rainbow of coral. That's pretty. Only 86 of the 780 or so species from the sea that existed before the salinity crisis have survived into the modern day Mediterranean, and the fact they lived through the flood is a minor miracle. Those creatures, a collection of mollusks, plankton, and one standout sea slug, hooray, most likely survived by finding refuge in the few patches of water that remained after the sea dried it up. As the water poured in, the Western Mediterranean began refilling at a tremendous rate. Milcalf estimates the water flowed at a rate of somewhere between 68 and 100 million cubic meters per second, filling the sea by as much as 10 meters or 33 feet each day. The weight of the rising waters pressed it down on the Earth's crust, making it slide across the molten mantle underneath. This, as Daniel Garcia Castellanos, geophysicist at the CSIC Barcelona, and a pioneer in research into the Zaklan megaflood, would have triggered earthquakes that rippled through the region. For the goat antelope creature, Myotragus, which had walked across the dry sea to make its home in modern-day Mallorca and Menorca, the earthquakes, water and wind combined must have sounded like the roar of monstrous predators. Surely this was the end of the world as they knew it. Eventually, the rising water streamed over the lip of Sicily, and as the current moved east, it ate away at the land, leaving behind hundreds of long ridges, as if a giant hand had clawed through the dirt, like Italy. A little bit further east, the water hit another wall we now call the Malta Escarpment. This barrier divided the Mediterranean into west and east, turning the western Mediterranean into a giant bowl. For the water to make its way east, it first had to fill the western half of the sea. So once again, the illustration helps us here. So you have to fill, right? So this tops up the Atlantic, breaks its border here, so to speak, and the Strait of Gibraltar pours into here, fills this up 33 foot a day, and then eventually that has been reached, and then you have to fill this up. Now, here they call it the Malta Escarpment. Here they call it, oh, here we go. Yeah. See, they call this the Sicily Sill up top here. And then here we go, exactly, the Malta Escarpments, this drop down here. All right. Once the western half of the sea filled up enough for the water to make its way over the top of the wall, it tipped over into the east and down a cloud 1.5 kilometers. That means half a mile for us Americans, creating the largest waterfall in the history of our planet. Imagine a Niagara Falls, but 30 times taller. The crash of the water triggered more earthquakes, and the flood dumped mounds of sediment at the bottom of the sea as it rushed into the east. As the water rose in the east to meet the waters of the western Mediterranean, the earth stopped shaking. The wind died down. The water started clearing as if settled, sediment falling as it settled. sediment falling to the seafloor. Somewhere between 2 and 16 years after the first waters broke through the Strait of Gibraltar, not even a blink of an eye in geological time, the Mediterranean leveled off with the Atlantic. From the surface, we'll end it here. From the surface, all signs of upheaval disappeared. The Atlantic flowed lazily into the newly reformed Mediterranean, which was now free of walls or waterfalls. This sea, right, it's all full, so that big old waterfall is no longer there. The escarpment's been filled up. This sea, with its comparatively mild waters, looked much as it would millions of years later when ancient Greece and Rome established themselves on its edges. When the Greek poet Homer wrote of the sea monsters Scylla and Charybdis living off the coast of Sicily, he had no way of knowing that Charybdis, who often takes the form of a whirlpool pulling unfortunate sailors to their death in the gaps, had already been upstaged by history's own, or rather, by the sea's own history. It would take a surprisingly long time for any new sea creatures, monstrous or otherwise, to make a home in the Mediterranean. All right, so there we go. We'll end the screen share there, looking at a next major stage in human life. Again, this is just a brief overview of this week's reading, which I invite you to download on our project website. And you can follow along. It would be great to have you here and to really come to a greater, more mature appreciation of the humanities and human life, historically and artistically, on this earth. If you really get that itch, well, why don't you enroll in Apocatastasis to scratch it? And we have various levels of commitment from full-time students to weekly students to monthly seminarians, and even more informal arrangements depending on your state in life and interests. So you can find out all about that on our enrollment and matriculation site, and that's easily accessible from the main site, which is ticking below. Anyway, I must boogie woogie as you must, and I'll catch you next week. Just one programming announcement. As this semester is shaking up, it's looking like these classes will be on Wednesday this semester, not Tuesday, throughout much of the summer, even up to last week. In this month of September, this month of grace, we've been doing it on Tuesdays just because of my other obligations. You're going to start seeing these on Wednesday, so just make a note of that. And you can either pre-gain your reading for that or use these presentations as an introduction to subsequent reading for the week. In any case, thank you so much, and I will catch you indeed around, maybe on the bottom of the Mediterranean. Allez.